Picture this. A kitchen faucet has been dripping for 3 days. One person grabs their phone and calls a plumber. The other kneels under the sink, looks around, feels the pipes, thinks for a minute. 20 minutes later, the leak is gone. The real question isn't who's more skilled. The question is what happens inside the second person's mind that never happens inside the first. It isn't about their hands. Hands are just tools. The difference is in the brain, and in how that brain approaches an unfamiliar problem. There are 6 psychological traits that consistently show up in people like this. The people who look at something broken and immediately see the possibility of a solution. The people everyone calls when something stops working. The ones you hear described as, they can fix anything. Most people assume that's a gift you're born with. They believe there are people who naturally know how to repair things, and then there's everyone else. As if some people entered the world already holding a wrench. It's a comforting belief because it removes responsibility. If you weren't born with it, then there's no point trying. But talk to the people who really can fix almost anything. Ask them, were you always like this? You'll almost always hear the same answer. No. At some point, I started looking at problems differently. I started thinking differently. I reacted differently. That's psychology. These are deeply ingrained thinking habits that develop over years, often through frustration, through mistakes, through moments when no one was around to help, and the only option was to figure it out yourself. That's exactly where this kind of mind is built. The first trait is a high tolerance for chaos. Psychologist Albert Bandura, one of the most influential researchers of the 20th century, identified something he called self-efficacy, the belief that you can successfully handle a challenge. According to his research, that belief often determines whether someone even attempts a difficult task in the first place. Notice what matters here. It's not ability, it's belief in your ability. Imagine an 8-year-old boy who completely takes apart his father's alarm clock. Every screw, every spring, every gear scattered across the kitchen table. His father walks in and sees the mess. Most kids would panic, they'd hide, they'd expect to be in trouble. This boy just keeps staring at the pieces, trying to understand how they fit together. He's not afraid that it's broken. He's fascinated by how it works. Psychologists call this tolerance for ambiguity, the ability to stay mentally calm when everything has been reduced to disconnected pieces and the solution isn't obvious. For most people, chaos triggers an alarm. Their brain says, this is dangerous. Back away. Call someone who knows what they're doing. People who can fix things experience that signal differently. Either it's much quieter, or they've learned to hear it without obeying it. Bandura described this as self-efficacy, the confidence that you'll eventually solve the problem, even if you have no idea how at the beginning. The outcome is uncertain, but your hands are already reaching for the toolbox. You sit in front of something broken thinking, I'll figure this out. No guarantees, no instructions, just the confidence that there's a solution waiting to be uncovered. In a landmark study published in 1977, Bandura found that self-efficacy predicted whether people would take action even better than their actual skill level. Those who believed they could solve a problem tried more often, stayed with it longer, and were more likely to succeed, even when they started with less knowledge. In other words, confidence comes before competence, not the other way around. One of the most interesting places to watch this play out is at the hardware store on a Saturday morning. Half the customers walk in, already knowing exactly which replacement part they need. The other half stand in the aisle, hoping an employee will come rescue them. The difference isn't knowledge, it's the willingness to step into a problem before the solution is visible. For people who love fixing things, a hardware store isn't just a store, it's a playground. Every aisle represents another possibility, and walking out with a bag full of parts you're not even completely sure will fit, that's ambiguity tolerance in action. The second trait is systems thinking. MIT systems scientist Donella Meadows argued that people differ fundamentally in how they perceive problems. Most people think in straight lines. I push this button, something should happen, nothing happens, it's broken. Then they call someone else to fix it. Systems thinkers see feedback loops. They recognize that one part affects another, which influences a third, which eventually circles back to the first. Some people look at a car and simply see a car. Others look at the exact same vehicle and see an engine, a fuel system, electrical circuits, suspension components, and more importantly, how every one of those systems depends on the others. Those are two completely different ways of seeing the world. Imagine a woman in her mid-40s who works as an accountant. In her laundry room sits an old washing machine that most people would have replaced years ago. Instead, she's repaired it herself 3 times over the past 5 years. Ask her how she knows what to do, and she'll probably shrug. I just think about what connects to what. I look for the point where the chain breaks. That's systems thinking. It's the brain's habit habit of searching for relationships instead of isolated facts. Or picture a common American situation. Your home's air conditioner suddenly stops cooling in the middle of July. Most people immediately call an HVAC technician. A systems thinker starts somewhere else. First, they check the thermostat, then the air filter, then the circuit breaker. Then they inspect whether the outdoor condenser is running or whether airflow is blocked. They don't think the AC is broken. I need an expert. Whoa. They think this cooling system is made up of several connected parts, and somewhere along that chain, something has failed. That isn't specialized technical knowledge. It's a way of thinking. One of the places you see this mindset most often in America is inside someone's garage or workshop on a weekend. You'll find people who spend their weekdays behind a computer but happily devote Saturday afternoon to repairing a lawnmower, building shelves, restoring an old bicycle, or upgrading their home's irrigation system. Not because that's their profession, because they've trained themselves to see relationships between parts. A lawnmower, a ceiling fan, a vacuum cleaner, and a kitchen blender all work differently on the surface, but underneath, many of the same principles repeat themselves. Once your brain recognizes the pattern, it starts applying it everywhere. That's why these people often become surprisingly capable across completely different areas of life. Their knowledge isn't what transfers, the pattern does. The third trait is a high tolerance for frustration. Psychologist Paul Ekman spent decades studying human emotions, and one of his most important insights was that emotions themselves aren't the real problem. The real problem is the automatic behavior they trigger. You've probably lived through this before. Something isn't working. 5 minutes pass. 10 10, 15. You can feel the frustration building. You want to throw the tool across the room. You want to quit. You want to toss the broken thing in the trash and forget about it. For most people, that's exactly where the process ends. People who can fix things simply have that breaking point much farther away. That's the third trait. They can tolerate the discomfort of not knowing longer than most people can. They feel the same emotions everyone else does. Anger tells you to slam the wrench down. Anxiety tells you to call a professional. Embarrassment whispers, "You're not good at this. Just stop trying." The difference is that they create a pause between the emotion and the reaction. While from the outside, it can look like they're unusually calm. In reality, it's usually the results of years of practice. For many people, that training begins in childhood. They grew up in families where money was tight. Broken things got repaired because replacing them simply wasn't an option. Frustration wasn't an exception. It was part of everyday life. So the brain adapted. For many Americans who grew up during difficult economic times or in households where every dollar mattered, fixing things wasn't a hobby. It was a necessity. And when there are no easy alternatives, your brain learns to treat frustration differently. Instead of seeing it as a signal to quit, it becomes part of the process. In psychology, there's a term for this: distress tolerance. It refers to the ability to endure uncomfortable emotional states without reacting impulsively. Psychologist Marsha Linehan, the creator of dialectical behavior therapy, identified distress tolerance as one of the strongest predictors of psychological resilience. What's especially interesting is that it isn't something you're simply born with. It can be trained, not by reading about it, by repetition, by staying with the problem during the exact moments when every instinct tells you to walk away. The fourth trait is knowing how to put your ego on pause. Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck spent decades showing that our beliefs about ability shape everything, from academic performance to how we respond when life doesn't go according to plan. What kills most repair attempts isn't the difficulty of the task, it's ego. I should already know this. Asking for help is embarrassing. If I need instructions, then I'm obviously not good at it. If I admit I don't understand something, I look incompetent. Thoughts like these are poison. They stop learning before learning even begins. People who can fix almost anything tend to share a different quality: openness, not softness, openness. They're open to new information. They're comfortable saying, "I don't know." They're perfectly willing to search for a YouTube video that explains a mechanism they've never seen before. They're comfortable asking someone with more experience. Carol Dweck calls this a growth mindset. Her research consistently shows that people who believe abilities can be developed perform better on difficult tasks, persist longer, and experience fewer blows to their self-esteem along the way, because to them, "I don't know" is a starting point. To everyone else, it feels like a verdict. One of the most fascinating things about this trait is how broadly it applies. People who can put their ego on pause admit mistakes more easily. They change their minds when the evidence supports it. They learn from coworkers, neighbors, spouses, friends, even from their own children. A mind that isn't constantly defending its self-image is a mind that has more energy available for solving problems. The fifth trait is pattern recognition. Neuroscientist Jeff Hawkins proposed a theory that helps explain what intelligence actually looks like in practice. According to Hawkins, the neocortex is constantly comparing incoming information with patterns it has already encountered every second. Automatically, the brain isn't primarily searching for answers, it's searching for similarities. That's why some people can pick up an unfamiliar device and seem to understand how it works within seconds. From the outside, it looks like magic. It isn't. It's pattern recognition. If you've spent years examining broken things, taking things apart, and trying to understand how they work, your brain gradually builds a massive library of patterns. Then, when you encounter something new, the comparison process begins almost instantly. What does this remind me of? What have I seen before? What works in a similar way? This explains the experienced mechanic who glances at an engine and immediately suspects the alternator, or the technician who hears a strange sound and identifies the failing bearing before anyone else notices it. What appears to be a superpower is really the combination of a large pattern library and the habit of constantly making comparisons. And here's the encouraging part. That library can be built at any age, in any field. Every time you try to understand something, even if you ultimately fail to fix it, you add another pattern to the collection. Even failure trains the brain. That's what experience really is. You can't download it. You have to accumulate it. Why? I've seen this process firsthand. The first time I tried to clear a clogged sink drain, I had no idea what I was doing. It was messy. It took longer than expected. The result was far from perfect. But months later, when I had to do it again, something had changed. My hands seemed to know where to go. My brain had stored a pattern, not as a fact, as a feeling. I knew. This is what those threads feel like when they loosen. This is how that fitting turns. This is the sound water makes when it's finally flowing freely again. No book can fully teach that. No video can replace it. Only experience can. Ain't it? The sixth trait is a connection to the physical world. Sociologist Richard Sennett proposed an idea that becomes more relevant every year as our lives move further into the digital realm. The hand teaches the brain, not the other way around. Some people live almost entirely in a world of ideas, screens, spreadsheets, emails, documents, conversations. And then there are people who also live in the world of physical things. They can feel the resistance of a material. They notice the sound a tool makes when something isn't aligned correctly. They recognize the difference between solid hardwood and particle board the moment they touch it. Their understanding isn't only intellectual, it's sensory. This is a form of physical, tactile knowledge, a direct channel connecting us to reality. Richard Sennett's central idea is simple but profound. When you hold a tool in your hand, your brain receives information that words can never fully capture. The resistance of the material, the amount of force that's just enough, the subtle moment when a part finally clicks into place. Experiences like these create a different kind of confidence, not confidence based on ideas, but confidence rooted in your body, the feeling that you are capable of acting in the physical world, and that affects the mind more deeply than most people realize. Psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust, believed that meaning emerges through action, through creating something, and through direct engagement with reality. When you repair something with your own hands, you haven't just solved the technical problem, you've reminded yourself that your actions matter, that you can shape the world around you. In an age where so much of life happens behind screens, and where many people increasingly feel powerless in the face of real-world problems, that connection to the physical world isn't just a hobby, it's a psychological anchor. Maybe that's why woodworking classes, pottery studios, makerspaces, and community repair workshops have become so popular across the United States. People sense that something is missing, not another app, not another screen. They miss the resistance of real materials beneath their fingertips, the sound of a mechanism finally locking into place, the quiet satisfaction of watching something that was broken come back to life, and knowing that it happened because of something you did. Now comes the part that's worth being honest about. When you watch people like this, you may feel something tighten inside you. It's difficult to name. Part admiration, part frustration, maybe even disappointment in yourself, because somewhere in the back of your mind lives a belief, I'm just not the kind of person who can do that. But that belief probably didn't start with you. You picked it up somewhere, maybe as a child, when you broke something and got yelled at instead of being shown how it worked. Maybe at school, where mistakes were treated as failures instead of opportunities to learn. Maybe in a home where someone else always took over and told you, don't touch that, you'll only make it worse. Your brain learned an invisible lesson. Trying is risky, yet breaking things is embarrassing. Better not to touch them at all. And you've carried that lesson ever since. So when you see someone confidently stepping into the unknown, you wonder what they have that you don't. Now you know. They aren't operating with a different brain. They're operating with different habits of thought. Habits shaped by experience, by permission to make mistakes, by years of engaging with real problems instead of avoiding them. And here's the most important part. None of this is reserved for a special group of people. These traits aren't inherited. They're developed. Your brain is plastic. Neuroplasticity isn't a motivational buzzword. It's biology. Every time you attempt something unfamiliar, the connections between your neurons begin to reorganize. Every time you stay with discomfort just a little longer than you wanted to, your tolerance for frustration expands. Every time you tell yourself, I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out, you're strengthening your sense of self-efficacy. Now, psychologists also talk about something called your locus of control. It's a simple question. Who do you believe is steering your life? You or your circumstances? People who can fix almost anything aren't simply lucky. They tend to have what's called an internal locus of control. When they encounter a problem, their first instinct is, this is something I can influence. They've trained themselves to think that way. Back in the 1960s, psychologist Julian Rotter found that people with a strong internal locus of control generally experience less fear, take more initiative, and recover more effectively from setbacks. Not because they're naturally more optimistic, because their brains automatically treat problems as things that respond to action. And that belief grows one small success at a time. One bolt tightened, one pipe repaired, one challenge accepted instead of handed off to someone else. Perhaps the most fascinating realization is this: the ability to repair broken objects and the ability to repair your own life are built on exactly the same psychology, the same brain, the same mental habits, the same 6 traits: a leaking faucet, a struggling relationship, a habit you can't seem to break. The process is remarkably similar. Step into the chaos. See the system instead of the symptom. Stay with the discomfort. Quiet the ego. Look for patterns. Trust what you learn through your own hands. A master isn't someone who has never broken anything. A master is someone who has broken enough things that they're no longer afraid of what's broken.